It's kind of funny. For years now, people have been warning that the foundations of our biggest competitor were so flawed that there would be no way for that ecosystem to ever scale without massive centralization. Having heard that repeatedly, some people are still denying it, even as it actually happens right before their eyes. Unfortunately for them, centralization in and of itself won't be the only extremely negative ramification of this shift. If we learned anything over the last several months, it's that centralization is also like a neon sign for regulators that says, please enter as forcefully as possible. While this is probably very bad for that ecosystem, it's a giant opportunity for us. Cardano can do it massively better. We can hit a much better balance between decentralization and scaling while still preserving our security. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss some stark observations about these centralized L2s that seem to be proliferating throughout crypto and how Cardano can do it better, some rumors about Silvergate and Washington, the Treasury Department talking very directly about CBDCs, some retiring stake pools, and another new look at Pavia. If you know exactly who this is and what movie-derived meme this references, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the army of spies stake pool, ticker AOS. We're going to talk about these centralized L2s, and obviously Coinbase's new optimistic rollup L2 base is pretty prevalent among those. And we've already talked about how base is centralized. I'm not going to rehash all the details there, but just so that everybody is on the same page, notice this is an article that Coinbase wrote about Base. And if we come down here to their roadmap, our roadmap for decentralization in 2023, they say, hey, we will work towards progressing Base from a stage 0 rollup as defined by Vitalik. And they give you a link to a stage 1 rollup with a significant level of decentralization and trustlessness. So, of course, this is Cardano. We're rigorous. We're going to see what these definitions actually mean. Of course, Vitalik's post over here, as part of the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians, lays out some things that don't sound so good, which is, of course, why they just linked it in that article and didn't actually tell you what it was. So, stage 0, which is how they're going to roll out, is basically complete centralization. Stage 1 is just a 6 of 8 multi-sig, apparently. And stage 2, which if they get there, they say they're going to get there maybe next year. Who knows when they actually get there, but at some point down the road, if they actually get to stage 2 involves something called a security council. You can already tell where this is going. The security council does things like adjudicate in the case of disagreements. And in this bullet point, control temporarily turns over to the Security Council. Also in this bullet point, control temporarily turns over to the Security Council. Of course, whenever you have stuff like this in crypto, they always say, hey, this is a corner case. This won't happen that often. You don't need to worry about this. But the whole point of trustlessness is we don't want for there to be anything to worry about. We don't want to have to worry about trusting a security council to make the right decisions or only temporarily take control and do the right things when it does temporarily take control. Trustlessness would require that there is no security council. So it seems that in all 3 of these stages, as defined by Vitalik and as referenced, his definitions referenced in the base article, it seems like there's a whole lot of centralization in every single stage of this type of rollup. Of course, that's not the only centralization problem in these EVM world L2s. Emin Gunsirer takes a lot of flack because he's an outspoken guy and he's also a founder of Avalanche. But I think he says some things that are very accurate in this thread. He says, if someone is running a layer 2 with a centralized sequencer, and notice this is a different form of centralization than the centralization we were just talking about. But if you understand how a lot of these L2s are going to run, centralized sequencers are going to be a thing that people are going to encounter. If someone is running an L2 with a centralized sequencer and they have a DEX on their chain, How are they not de facto running an exchange? And how are they not in violation of the many regulations that govern exchanges? He makes a very good point here. I think the purpose of a lot of these L2s is to handle the traffic from DeFi, and a lot of that traffic will involve DEXs. It's going to be really hard for these L2s to make the argument that they're not just running an exchange. If you have centralized sequencers running your L2 and you have a DEX on your L2, the regulators are just going to impute that centralization to the air quotes decentralized exchange, and they're going to say that's a centralized exchange. We're going to regulate that just like we would Coinbase or Kraken or any other centralized exchange. This is a distinct possibility that a lot of people are sleeping on. He says there's a lot of drama these days involving transaction ordering on L2s. You'll understand that this is the minor extractable value, maximal extractable value. This is what results in MEV, this transaction ordering, essentially because the centralized sequencer places the centralized chain operator in a privileged position, opening the door to a lot of funny games to front run users, all the sandwich transactions. We've talked about this on this channel a million times. Various hacks and complications to dress this fact up do not change the underlying broken dynamic. And I agree, it's very broken. There is a single centralized entity that is, in essence, determining transaction ordering. This is a huge problem. I think a lot of the Washington policymakers, they don't even know about MEB yet. They don't even know it exists. But as soon as they do, that's going to be plenty. That's going to be plenty for them to swoop down on any of these centralized L2s. That is like the perfect foothold for them to come in and regulate like crazy. This not only has regulatory ramifications, but also ethical ones. I agree. The centralized chain operator will be tempted to extract value from the users front running and sandwiching them. We've seen this over and over again. If there's a possibility of front running and MEV and sandwich transactions, it will occur. Welcome to the new world of centralized L2s. It's exactly like the old world, except with more steps and complications. I think this is exactly what's going on. It's like TradFi. It's like abstractions upon abstractions, resulting in exactly the same thing as TradFi. We sought to disintermediate the traditional financial middlemen. What does centralization in crypto do? Just replicate the exact same type of middlemen with different names, different methods, but the same result. I mean, is it any different if you have some traditional finance Wall Street middleman shaving points off every single transaction you do, or if it's just some centralized party who's front running you and basically shaving points off every single thing you do, sometimes way worse than in the TradFi scenario, actually. FTX and SBF should have taught us never to compromise on decentralization and never to trust centralized components. Exactly. How many times do we have to learn this lesson? This is the lesson. Satoshi thought he was teaching us this lesson when he wrote the white paper over a decade ago, guys. The whole point of crypto, never trust centralized components. Here, people are unlearning that lesson and then imputing that unlearning to the entire ecosystem. We can do far better. What brought many of us to crypto was the promise of more open, more equal, and more democratic systems. Never trade off decentralization for anything. Nothing, not even a distant airdrop, is worth it. And I think Charles has said exactly the same thing. Everybody in crypto who was here when crypto revolved around these types of principles is still saying the same thing. But you've got a lot of people coming in, and some of them doing this kind of stuff are from that same era. Some of them have been around a long time and they kind of lost their way. And then you got a lot of new guys coming in, and of course, they're doing what humans do. They see dollar signs and they're like, am I going to go to jail? Maybe, maybe not. If maybe not is more than 51% of the chance, then I'm probably going to do it. That's what humans seem to do in finance. If they are at all convinced they won't end up in jail for doing it, and there's a lot of money to be made, they will probably do it. Someone will do it. Not everyone will do it, but some will do it. And that's definitely happening. These centralized L2s are not what crypto was supposed to be. I think in Cardano, we can do this much better. I think it is too late for most of the EVM world. Most of the EVM world, it is too late for them. Even Coinbase is running this L2, which, I mean, somebody can convince me otherwise. I'm more than happy to change my opinion upon, you know, receipt of additional conflicting information. But as near as I can tell, it looks extremely centralized. This L2 looks very centralized. And sure, it's going to get less centralized. According to them, sometime next year we reach stage 2, but there's still this thing called a security council that kind of steps in and adjudicates and temporarily takes control. That's too centralized. Then you've got the sequencing of transactions thing that Emin Gün Sirer is talking about here. Also way too centralized. If anybody had told me when I read Satoshi's white paper, hey, by the way, there's also going to be these centralized parties who get to choose the order of the transactions, I immediately would have been like, yo, I'm out. I'm out. I know where that's going to go. That's not going to go to a good place. I wouldn't have known the name MEV for that, but I probably would have immediately said that's going to result in front running. I didn't come to crypto to get front run. We shouldn't do this in Cardano. We can do something better. There are better solutions. And I think, we do need to have this layer verse in Cardano. And some of those layers, you can make that trade-off if you want to. You can have that trade-off where it's a more centralized layer, where you can have very, very high scalability and a different kind of security that involves trusting some centralized parties. You can totally have that layer. I'm not saying don't have that layer. What I'm saying is let's not allow those types of layers to swallow decentralization. Let's not let them get so big that they're doing all the transactions. Sure, there are probably times when you don't care about decentralization, when you don't care if some centralized parties are sequencing transactions, doing batching, this kind of stuff. We already have that. But let's not let that swallow the decentralization of the whole chain. Let's stay mainly decentralized. And I don't just mean a base layer that runs like 0.5% of all the transactions. I'm saying let's keep these centralized layers, which it's okay to have them, but let's keep those to use cases where it makes sense. Let's not let them run our whole ecosystem. We can do better. We can find a better way, a better balance. We can strike a better balance between decentralization and scaling. I think we can do this better because we were built on better foundations that were created recently enough that the architects of our ecosystem, they could foresee this conflict between scaling and decentralization. And sure, the architects of Ethereum, back when they created the foundations of Ethereum, they also knew about the blockchain trilemma, of course, and even probably coined the term, but I don't think they had such a nuanced understanding of it when they built the foundations of the EVM world as the architects of Cardano did when they built our ecosystem. You'll remember yesterday we talked about how Silvergate had delayed their 10K and it looked like they were probably going to get crushed. Well, that happened today. This post says, today Silvergate has lost Coinbase, Circle, Paxos, Galaxy, CBOE. Rest in peace. And down here further, there was an update. Also, crypto.com. I believe that leaves Kraken and maybe one other crypto company, something like that. I'm sure there's a bunch of minor ones I don't know about, but the big other exchange I can think of that seemed to use Silvergate was Kraken. So this is a very rough day for any bank. Of course, all of that might have something to do with these rumors. Update, and I'm just reading a post. I'm not vouching for the truth of this, but rumors that Silvergate will be seized and go into receivership by the FDIC, and Wells Fargo is set to take over customer accounts. The amount of political pressure, and this part is interesting. The source for this rumor said the amount of political pressure from the White House and Elizabeth Warren on regulatory agencies to cripple crypto is unprecedented right now. When all of this started, people were calling this choke point 2.0. And that was a reference to The label that was applied to this series of actions years ago in a prior administration, when they basically decided to cut off banking privileges for a bunch of political undesirables. This time around, it's us, crypto. We are the political undesirables, according to the current administration. And it looks like they are, in fact, doing what a lot of people predicted, choke point 2.0. This source, again, these are, un uh unreliable rumors. We don't know the basis of these rumors. We just get there is a source. Anonymous, undescribed sources are notoriously unreliable by their nature. But this source is saying that the White House and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate are actually ramping up the pressure on regulatory agencies to cripple crypto. Why would they be doing this? This is probably part of why they're stepping up the pressure on regulators to strangle crypto. The Treasury Department is getting very serious about directly talking about a CBDC, a US Fed coin. So here we have an undersecretary for domestic finance talking about next steps to the future of money and payments. And of course, they go through all of the requisite preamble stuff, talking about failures of large crypto firms, runs on stablecoins. Then they say, more specifically, today we're going to talk about CBDCs. And she says CBDC is one of several options for upgrading the legacy capabilities of central bank money. Another is as a real-time payment system. So notice they're going to upgrade the capabilities of the central bank. Central bank money is going to be upgraded. And the real question is, what kind of upgrades are we talking about? Are these upgrades just going to make it easier for people to use this money? Are we just talking about wholesale money or wholesale and retail money? What are we talking about here? And what kinds of upgrades are there going to be in terms of surveillance? So they say CBDC would involve both a new form of central bank money and potentially a new set of payment rails. So right there, they're signaling to us, yes, we are going to talk about wholesale and also retail. So CBDC options, they talk about the different options. They could have a wholesale CBDC. They could also have a retail CBDC. And they say the architecture for those two things might be different. Makes sense. So then we get down here to policy questions for the CBDC working group. So this part is pretty interesting. And before we get there, we should comment on this. They say a retail CBDC could contribute to a more competitive and innovative payment system, support financial inclusion, and help preserve the singleness of the currency. So you notice they're interested in preserving the singleness of the currency. That to me sounds like there's not a lot of room for crypto. It doesn't sound like they're interested in a plurality of currencies. They want a singleness. So I don't think they want a bunch of, US blank blank, whatever we call it, US, UC, whatever crypto acronyms we come up with for any stablecoin. I don't think they're interested in that. They don't want that plurality of currencies. They want to preserve a singleness of the currency. And one encouraging thing is up here around footnote 3. I kind of skipped over this, but they say the Fed has also emphasized that it would only issue a CBDC with the support of the executive branch and Congress, and more broadly, the public. I hope that last part, more broadly, the public, is for real and not just for show. I hope they actually mean that, because if they just did this with the executive branch and Congress, I don't know if the public, large portions of the public might be pretty alarmed. But back to the policy considerations. So here's where they get into the parts of this that are going to be kind of chilling for some people. So as we go down here, they say the third set of objectives relate to privacy, illicit finance, and financial inclusion. So the first and second set were predictable: global financial leadership, national security. But when they get down here to this part, privacy, illicit finance, and financial inclusion, I think we all know this is where one of these things will suffer at the expense of the others. So we can say that it's predictable privacy will suffer and the benefit will be transferred to prevention of illicit finance and increase of financial inclusion. But when we talk about financial inclusion, that becomes a pretty politicized issue, of course. They say a U.S. CBDC would need to both protect the privacy of users and minimize the risk of illicit financial transactions. In addition, given that the United States is the largest unbanked population among G7 countries on a per capita basis and that payments are expensive for some users, a potential US CBDC should be evaluated on whether it can promote inclusion and equity in the delivery of financial services. So you could look at this two different ways. You could say, oh, this sounds a lot like banking the unbanked. This is a core mission of a lot of crypto. You could also say, hey, anytime you start throwing around those particular words, you get into some weird political territory where people start asking for things in the name of inclusion and equity that large portions of the electorate don't agree with. You get into some pretty polarizing political territory with those things. And you can also imagine a pretty severe level of surveillance to achieve this minimization of illicit financial transactions. In fact, down here, they kind of lay out their own blockchain trilemma, which is very different from our blockchain trilemma. Theirs is sort of like a central bank trilemma, digital central bank trilemma. They say this suggests a three-way trade-off among privacy, countering illicit finance goals, and inclusion. So interestingly, they say it's a three-way trade-off. So not only are they saying that countering illicit finance is going to hurt privacy, but inclusion may also hurt privacy. They're basically telling you straight up here, the things we're thinking about when we say inclusion and equity may hurt privacy. In my mind, when I think about, this sort of banking the unbanked, I don't think about anything there that would hurt privacy. That tells me that maybe their version of banking the unbanked, which they call promoting inclusion and equity, it may be very different than what we think of as banking the unbanked in crypto. Just a quick public service message. These three Genius Yield pools are retiring. If you are in one of these three pools, you should redelegate to a single pool operator. It doesn't have to be AOS, but it could be. Finally, Pavia is giving us another glimpse of something that is apparently coming in the central plaza. This looks to me like an amphitheater. It looks like we've got kind of an old school style amphitheater, something you might run into. I mean, it kind of looks like something you'd run into in like AC Odyssey. So you've got, instead of like the big fancy chairs, you just kind of got the old school sort of stone or cement bleachers, benches, nothing too fancy. You do have a covered stage down here. And I like this little touch. They added the vines sort of creeping up this little pole here supporting these little sail style coverings. It's kind of funny because the sails, I guess if the sun gets low enough, like over on this side, I guess we're supposed to imagine the sun's low enough that it's casting a shadow. You'd think that these sails would almost want to like go over the actual bleachers. I think if you're I guess maybe we're supposed to imagine. I was going to say that if the sun is actually high in the sky, it would only create shade up here where there are no seats. Maybe they're imagining people in like folding lawn chairs, or maybe they're imagining that concerts take place in the evening when the sun is low in the sky. Either way, I'm looking forward to actually seeing all of this stuff in Pavia. I hope you're getting ready for a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.